Hi again, everyone, and welcome to a new edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, January 16th. I'm pleased to welcome in our all-star panel of top local journalists, Christina McDermott, staff writer for The Independent, Ryan P. Cruz of The Independent, and Josh Molina, all-rise editor-in-chief of the Santa Barbara News Press. Thank you all for coming. I want to talk about the big news of the week, which was, of course, the rent freeze at City Council. But before we do that, I want to spend a little time discussing the last two cover stories for the Independent of the print edition, and we're fortunate to have the authors of those two. First of all, Christina, let's start with you. Welcome to Isla Vista is a new limited series soon to be on Netflix podcast on the Independent, which is totally embarrassing Josh and I in terms of its production values and having a script and an actual coherent a coherent argument to it. Talk a little bit about what Welcome to Isla Vista is and why you decided to do it.
Yeah, so I in January of last year, Marianne Partridge told me I was in charge of Isla Vista coverage by and large. I was splitting some of the UCSB coverage, and also there was a development going on, going through the Planning Commission and IV a couple months after, and I got really interested in kind of how IV got the way it is because it is unique. And I poked through the archives, and like the more I was reading on it, the more I was like, this would make a really good story. But there's a lot of details, and I don't want people to get lost into details in like a giant print thing. And I come from the world of radio. And so I pitched to do a podcast on it and started working on it in July. And actually, I'm still working on it because there's four more episodes to come out. Um, and it's kind of on like the history of IV in its development and creation, and then kind of where we are today and how we got to what Isla Vista is, both the good and the bad. And it really does have a planning and development focus, like a housing focus, but there's some other elements in there, especially as we get into the later episodes, of what makes Isla Vista Isla Vista.
Yeah, it's one of those kind of hiding in plain sight perceptual scoop things. Because I don't know, probably if you went back in the 10 years history of newsmakers and, just did a word search for IV, it would be 28 million times we mentioned it. But we didn't really think about how it got to be what it is. And my takeaway, I have to say, this week from your piece on the students present and past who live there, it's kind of a resource for real estate exploitation more than anything else, is what it seems like.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you see for, 30, almost 30 years, like these failed attempts to exploit oil from Isla Vista. Like Signal Oil and Gas, along with Honolulu Oil in the 40s, poured what in today's money is $20 million into drilling in IV and didn't really ever get much out of it. And so then once it becomes a place where you can rent to students, because of its proximity to the university, it suddenly becomes a moneymaker after a long time of not being a moneymaker for people. And I think it's kind of, for some folks, has maintained that ability to produce profit through real estate. Um,
Yeah. Now, one of the interesting, I mean, I think the first or one of the first development companies that you referenced, I was pleased to see that the former chancellor of UCSB was on the board. I was like, what?
Oh,
What?
of the loan, the
Yeah.
Goleta Savings and Loan. That's a really interesting, as someone who is great into financial reporting, should dig into that because I couldn't, I had seen this essay that claimed that they were all, getting their money from them, and I could never really find that. But I went through a lot of the old newspapers, and they have holiday parties that they would advertise, and they put the whole board, and there's Cheadle and Mosher and Harlan, and actually the business head of the news press was one of the board members too. And
Why
this was in
not?
the like 60s. It was really interesting.
You got that, Josh? Don't tell your publisher that, that'll be his next line of revenue. He'll be wanting to buy up slum properties in Ivy.
Era, Jerry. Come on. It's the
Uh,
AI era.
I kid. I kid. Anyway, everybody should check it out. Welcome to Isla Vista. It's a podcast, and if you're not uh, audio oriented, you can read the transcript as well, which is really useful for those of us who like to read things. But it's really well done, and kudos to you, Christina, for just a really top shelf piece of work. And speaking of that, Ryan, your cover story this week about a fellow named Jupiter Lara Castillo, who was a DACA recipient who got snatched up by ICE. You've been doing a good job all along covering, what ICE is doing, but this really, I think, for the first time, puts a face puts a human face on what the hell's going on here. Talk a little bit about him and his story and how you got it, how you got.
Yeah, so we've all seen the videos of by now of ICE, these masked, unmarked vehicles, masked agents, bulletproof vests, kind of snatching people off the streets, and we don't really, and it's been really hard to report on what happens after that. People that have been arrested haven't really had a chance to tell their stories. Often they're just whisked away to detention centers or taken to Mexico or wherever their home country is or wherever they're getting sent to, and never to be heard from again. And it's really hard for us to kind of put a face to all the people that are getting arrested on a day-to-day basis. There's been over 1,000, I think 1,300 now since Donald Trump took office in the Central Coast. That's the Tri-County area. And, I'm really grateful to Jupiter, Mr. Lar Castillo for, reaching out and, I think he read a few of our earlier stories and he reached out to me and, he was really brave to tell this story. A lot of people are it's for good reason, scared to put their names in the paper or have their faces in the paper, but I think him being in Mexico City and the worst was behind him, he felt like he wanted to share his story with people here in Santa Barbara and show that it's not just criminals. We hear Kristi Noem and we hear DHS and Tom Homan and Stephen Miller and these federal officials saying, criminalizing people who are as we look into the data really says that out of the almost 70,000 people that are in detention right now, more than 70% have no prior criminal conviction, or like Jupiter, a speeding violations, a minor traffic violation, something like that.
But that's not why they kicked him out.
Exactly. And one of what really stuck out about his story to me is just how they picked him up and they were very much, almost like joking about it, telling him, "Oh, we weren't looking for you. Oh, we were just around here in Santa Barbara, and you looked Latino. You looked the part." And that really it got to him, and that really got to me when he told me that part. And that's what I think this story is. This is why we get into journalism. To be able to share stories like this. When people are willing to put their faces out there and their names out there, and say that they're not criminals. These everybody that's being deported is not a criminal. I'm sure that there are, but the way that they're going about it right now, and we've received a lot of comments about comparing the Trump administration to Obama or Biden. But when you look at the numbers, yes, the previous administrations had more number deportations, but when you look at the percentage of people that had criminal records, they were going after people who were prior convictions, had serious convictions. And here, I think when there's 150 people taken the last week in Santa Maria, DHS, I think they got back to us a week or two after, and they furnished 10 people out of the more than 100 people that were arrested, 10 people that had charges or convictions. So that's about a 10% by my math. And, that's not a good look for when you're trying to say you're picking up the criminal aliens, and we see that they're not. They're like Jupiter. They're like people that are working in the community. He was a UCSB grad. He'd been here since he was 7. And people that are still trying to find a way to say, well, he should have done it. He had time to do this. They don't know how hard it is. They don't know what it's like.
Well,
to
he had done, and he was
Yes,
done, and he was
he had
preparing.
renewed. And for DACA, unless they have a spouse or a parent that can sponsor them, it's not like they can just snap their fingers and become a citizen. They have to renew every year. And as we saw this year, DHS is really not considering DACA as legal status anymore, which is just a huge shift in what's how it's
Well,
being
it's really, yeah.
interpreted.
I mean, the policy's been in effect since what, 2012 or something like that. He's here
And
legally. He's done
there's
everything he's supposed to. He's preparing to do the next thing he's supposed to do, and he gets snatched up. That I want to go back to something you said real quickly though, because when he got in the car, when he was in the back of the car and he's shackled, and they're laughing about it the agents are laughing, and they said that was an easy one. That's the difference between the Biden and the Obama and this admission. It's the cruelty and the sadism. It's sadism, and there's no other word for it. And that's what you see in Minneapolis, and that's what you see all across the country.
And it's so impersonal every step along the way. These agents that picked him up, he doesn't know their names, he doesn't know their badge numbers. You know, he's told they worked for Homeland Security, and then all the transport vans and the drivers and even the COs at Adelanto, they're not registered officers. They're security, they're private security that are working as COs. And every step along the way, there's millions and millions, over billions of dollars now that are going into housing and detaining and transporting
Yeah, no,
immigrants.
that was the other notion that really emerged from your reporting on that was that the private prison industry and all of its related vendors and how many billions of dollars involved with that.
And
And
it's the only immigration detention is the only government contracted institutions that have a capacity mandate where they have to have a 90%, their detention centers have to be filled 90% to fulfill their contract. So Geo and these companies that are housing immigrants are making lots of money, and they have to be 90% filled. So that, I think it's 1,940 beds that are at Adelanto. 1,900 have to be filled at all times to meet their government contract, and that's just wrong. That doesn't happen in any local county jails or any other detention facilities, which are making a lot of money as it is.
all
But
right. All right.
yeah,
Well, it's a terrific piece of work, and everybody should um, check out Ryan's cover story in the Independent out yesterday.
I
Beyond.
told Ryan privately, but I just want to say it on the record publicly that I was jealous of that piece, which is like professional respect. Because most of the stuff has been, like the Instagram stuff, So, and it's hard to do a story like that. It's very difficult. And so that was a great job, a great story.
And Josh, congratulations on restraining yourself from pointing out that everything Ryan knows he learned from you. But well, we with that we'll have that another
What
day.
if Ryan says that, then I do.
All right, let's
thanks.
talk about the big news of the week: the rent freeze passed 4-3 by the liberal faction of the Santa Barbara City Council on Tuesday. Josh, another epic meeting. A lot of strong feelings on both sides of this one, obviously.
Yeah, so the city council voted 4-3 to implement a rent freeze. It's gonna be read into the officially next week and go into effect 30 days after that. This was an incredible meeting. It was packed house, 150 people probably there total, in and out, standing room only, and lots of emotions, lots of renters, lots of tenants, lots of tenant advocates. There were landlords, there were property owners, and then there's just the tension on the council. And I'm just going to go to the lead first. Chelsea Lancaster sort of blew up the building figuratively with her comments. And basically, she kind of went after Eric Friedman, who's running for mayor, but she also, pointed at Mike Jordan, Eric Friedman, Randy Rouse, and, basically sort of said, your time is up. She sort of conveyed
Well,
the,
she did it in. Come on. I mean, what did she call them? Pale male? What? I mean, come on.
yeah,
They're
she
going
had
to
some
reap the
choice words.
whirlwind on this thing. This thing is going to have such unintended consequences and backlash, and that is going to be the moment that everybody points to. Yeah, we all want to work together, except not really.
Yeah, so those comments represented sort of what maybe like some people are thinking but not saying out loud, and certainly the like most extreme perspective. And yeah, but it encapsulates the whole emotion behind this issue. I don't know. I mean, I've heard that the property owners, landlords are going to pursue some litigation to try to block this. It's kind of backfired on them, right? Because the city of Santa Barbara is working on this overall rent stabilization ordinance. And landlords were saying, if you do this, if you cap our rents, we're just going to raise the rent as much as we can until that ordinance goes into effect. That was bad strategy because then they suggested, why don't we freeze the rents? And so now they're frozen until I guess December 16th or retro to that point. So there's a lot of emotion. We heard testimony from landlords saying, we're not corporate out of town investors. We own a few properties. We have high insurance costs, maintenance costs. You really are cutting into our bottom lines. And then you have tenants saying, well, we are far more impacted by a rent increase than you are by the rising costs of maintaining your building. So this is a huge, huge deal. And yes, Jerry, it could spark a backlash. And if we see candidates come out of the woodwork to run for office, this thing could get reversed in a year. We just don't know. It's 4-3. It's very close.
Ryan, the other thing that I think gets lost in so much of the argument, this only affects buildings constructed prior to 1995, which is to say older construction, which seems to me, and maybe I'm off base here, to be that which is most likely to be owned by the apocryphal mom and pop landlord rather than corporate or large builders, no?
Yeah, there's a lot of exceptions. Most of those are due to the Costa-Hawkins Act, state law, that has, you know, certain exemptions of what properties can have a cap on them, and that's single family dwellings and most condos, I believe. Uh, you know, motels, hotels, short-term rentals, institutional. That's like college housing, government housing, Section 8 housing, and affordable housing, and yeah, things like that. And there was some confusion about that. There's also a little bit of confusion about the retroactive date and what is the effective date. I know that there's a lot of people that got uh, their rent hikes between December 16th and January 13th when the vote was taken. As I understand it, as the language was written and how it's kind of been interpreted, is that those will kind of stand. Those will be able to stand, but that will be counted against those landlords in the future. So say the city council passes a rent cap at 3% and somebody raised their rent between December and January to 6%. That means for the next 2 years, that landlord for that unit won't be able to raise that rent. So that's a little bit confusing on how that's going to work out on the ground. I know that there's some landlords that have heard what was going on and, you know, up the rent a little bit to try to get ahead of the vote. And because they did not get that fifth vote, that was the other dramatic kind of part of the meeting. Was Mike Jordan or maybe Eric Friedman going to, you know, side with the emergency ordinance and you know, will they decide that it is an emergency? It needs to be capped right now. They didn't get that fifth vote. There was kind of a standoff about it. And as it stands, you know, it's going to take 30 days from next Tuesday for it to officially be effective. And that's going to affect, you know, it could be a couple hundred tenants that have gotten rent hikes between that time.
Christina, you've written a lot about housing, and of course, you are the Mickey Flax housing reporter over there. Um, I- all right, tell us authoritatively, once and for all, does rent control work or not?
I wish I could tell you that. I think it really depends on who you talk to. There was a really interesting, this is kind of funny. I had to look up a bunch of reels, Instagram reels for the podcast social media to get an idea. And there was one from an NPR show, this guy, and he does kind of goofy reels. And it shows like you have the tenants standing on the ground and then landlords kind of standing on a podium, and then the government, whatever city, town, standing on a higher podium, and they have water rising, and then they're discussing rent control as the water is up to the necks of the tenants, saying how rent control is going to
Mhm.
destroy the rental market or the housing market. And I think that's an issue, that there is a lot of problems with rent control if you think about certain aspects of it, but it can be hard to say that to someone who's already close to drowning. And that's why I think there's a lot of angles and elements. I think corporate landlords do, or they're just fundamentally different than smaller landlords. Um, so I wish I had an easy answer for you. I think people want an easy answer. But I think like it kind of exists more in an ecosystem than like, I'm using that metaphorically, than just an A or B. Like you have the price of rent, but you also have the infrastructure for things like where you live and what you can get to. And then you have wages, frankly, like our wages have not increased the way that other costs have increased across the board. And all of that has to exist together. So that was a really fancy way to sidestep the question, but I do think that you have to think about multiple factors going in, and what that could look like.
All
I
right,
do
well,
think,
go
sorry,
ahead.
the mom and pop landlord thing. One thing I have been thinking about is, some landlords have management companies. And what I've been told is that you really need a certain number of properties for a management company to make sense to pay them because they'll take a cut. And I have been wondering, like, okay, so how would you define a mom and pop landlord? Could you look at like who has management companies? And then, how many units do you to have one versus do you rent the thing next to you? You're not going to hire a management company for that. That doesn't make financial sense. So, yeah,
That's a
just like,
good, I mean, that's a good, that would be a great cover story. Who is the mom and pop landlord? What is, because that's the other phrase we just hear over and over again. And I think the mayor's correct about one thing. I mean, whether I agree with him on the policy or not, we don't have a lot of data about any of this. I mean, it's a lot of it's being done on emotion and anecdotal stuff and so on. However, we are a group of political hacks, so let's get right to the politics of the thing. Josh, one thing's for sure, Kristen Sneddon is going to be the candidate of rent control, and Randy Rouse is going to be the candidate against control. So it's only January, but I think we can put that frame on it at least. She had this op-ed in the Independent, which I thought was really kind of mealy-mouthed and full of technocratic
I
language.
remember a day when Kristen Sneddon was your number one, Jerry.
Well, no, I'm just saying it. And I told her, I thought it was a lousy piece because she's trying to have it both ways. Well, you're not going to have it both ways, and that's part of the reason she got the endorsement of the Democratic Party. Talk a little bit about that process, Josh. You had a piece about her getting the endorsement and what it's going to mean, and then Ryan, I want to ask you another question about that.
Well, I mean, Sneddon had the endorsement in the bag months ago. She was the only candidate who was going to get the endorsement. They wanted her to
But they
run.
stopped the process. I mean, they literally stopped or rescheduled the process.
Yeah, and, and part of that is like, you and I and, us talking about over the years how they endorsed too early and they shut out other candidates. So they're definitely more aware of that process. They were going to endorse in December, and then they decided to push it back to, early January, the first week in January. And because they found out that Wendy Sims Moten, former member of Santa Barbara Unified School District, was interested in running, as well as Eric Friedman, and they're both Democrats. So um, there was no chance they were not going to endorse Kristen Sneddon. She has pivoted very far from when she ran the first time, when she didn't get the endorsement. If you remember Jim Scafidi, if you remember that name from way back when, she was more of like, a general sort of supporter of housing, but she's really defined her position now as she's running for mayor. And she's very much pro rent control, rent stabilization, whatever term you want to use. And, so she's the one. Eric's not going to get it. They don't like Eric. They think Eric's too moderate.
I don't
He's
like
too
his mom.
conservative. They don't like her, his mom's positions on various things, and Eric's not a supporter of rent stabilization, and so that's out. There's not a lot of nuance with the Dem Party on this issue. It's like you're for us or you're against us. Wendy Sims Moten, I'm told her questionnaire was very, incomplete. A lot of one sentence answers, and didn't really show a whole breadth of knowledge on the issues, and so on city of Santa Barbara housing issues. And so Kristen got every vote as far as I know. So it was like unanimous.
Well,
So
I think you said there were 4 people didn't vote or something. So
yeah, well, I don't think anyone else got a vote, I know that. And so what does this mean? I mean, it's always huge when you're a Democrat and you have an endorsement of the Democratic Central Committee, because it's people who are going to work for you. It's people who are going to walk, who are going to phone bank, who are going to volunteer. She's going to be on a slate up the ticket with other Democrats. Can that be that system be broken? Of course. Kathy Murillo had the endorsement of the Democratic Party. We've seen this happen, but I don't know if anyone else is going to be substantive enough on the Dem side to run to split. Eric, quite frankly, he's going to get a lot of votes, but he's going to get votes from a little bit of Kristen's side, a little bit of Randy Rouse's side, but probably not enough to overtake Kristen Sneddon. There's some, conspiracy theories, rumors that Randy's going to step down and Eric's going to be the one and all of Randy's people. So if it's a one-on-one, that's more interesting. But if I'm calling it today, I'm saying, Kristen, Randy, Eric, Wendy, that's going to be the order.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan, my first thought when I heard Eric was getting in there, he was he would pull from both, but more from Kristen than Randy. But now I don't think that's true. I think he's going to hurt Randy more than he's going to hurt Kristen. I don't understand what Eric's base is. Do you think Eric has a base, and what is it?
I think Eric is that kind of a sweet spot with Democrat people who think Kristen might be too progressive. Maybe people who read her column and thought it maybe was a little too much, kind of like you did. Some people think that she's playing too hard to the more progressive side of Santa Barbara, but I think that there is a lot more younger progressive people in Santa Barbara than people know about. But I do think that Eric does hit that sweet spot for people who think Randy is not really aligning with any Democratic policies or going forward, but Eric has that kind of sweet spot where he's thinking about the working people, but he's also thinking about the businesses. I don't know if that is a successful strategy in this race, particularly. Like Josh has said, I don't know if he's going to steal more from Kristen or Randy. I think Eric would have a stronger chance if Randy were to drop out. That would make it definitely a one versus one interesting race. But I think the early nomination definitely gives Kristen a slight edge. And then also, like Josh says, it signals what the values for this Democrat, Kristen Alonso taking over the chair position, and what the Democratic Party is looking at. And it looks like it's housing. That's one of the biggest things Kristen has been part of. And it looks like that's kind of they're sending a signal that that's where we're putting our chips behind also.
There's an old saying in Texas politics that there's 2 things in the middle of the road: yellow stripes and dead armadillos. So I'm not sure that there's a third way to go on this one. And then
I will say this.
Just one more thing on this process, and it's a minor point, but I mean, the other question was, if you don't get the nomination, will you drop out of the race and endorse the Democrat? And of course, Kristen was the only one who said, "Oh yeah, absolutely." But
I think it was one of those, trick questions.
Trick question.
If you answer it right,
All right.
Eric's kind of a classic Democrat, except on some of these, like the rent control and the housing issues.
Well, on budget stuff, he's actually responsible about the way that you spend.
Yeah, I think that's where he lied. He's really going to go with the numbers.
Yeah.
I do want to say he works at Trader Joe's, which I like is cool to me, that he has just a regular job. He's not pretentious. And that shows his values to some degree, but I just think it's probably not the best spot for him to run if he wants to win. If he wants to keep his name out there and get his name out there and run for something else, smart,
Yeah, and Eric is well liked, working at Trader Joe's. And the heart attack, I think a lot of people, feel and like Eric and love Eric as a person. I really respect Eric. He's a Notre Dame alum. I'm a big Notre Dame fan. So, I align with him in some areas, but, I don't know if it's a crowded race at this point. We don't know if anybody's going to drop out to make it a little bit more simple, or if we're going to have a repeat of
Well,
the
the other
last
thing
time.
is, well, let's see. I mean, they'll campaign, there'll be a deadline, and who
There's a
emerges.
lot of time.
And I'm telling you, that Chelsea Lancaster thing, the ads make themselves against Kristen on
And
that.
one thing, Chelsea will never hold back. I've known Chelsea a couple of years back to City College when I was over at City College. She will not hold back. I respect that about her. She is really close to Hispanic and Black community, and she is well respected for being able to speak like that. Now, it does not work
It
in
does not
every,
make a good campaign ad. I will
yeah,
tell you that.
yeah, it doesn't work in every scenario, but she did give a speech at the courthouse, I think a week or two ago, and that was, that same passion, but for immigrants. And I think in the community we do need passionate people like that, but there's a time and a place, and I'm not a judge of
Let me
that.
just say this,
And
Jerry.
I agree with you. And I think it was appropriate at that time and place in the immigration thing. I think it's City Hall. Are you serious? I mean, we have so much hostility and hate and polarization and division, and we really need to bring it into local politics like that? No, it has no place. I'm sorry. It just doesn't belong there. All right.
I will say about Chelsea, though, last thing on her,
You
she
coward.
consistently shows up from 2020, even before then, till
Oh,
now.
she was going to run for council. Remember when Oscar got that in that special election? I
So
wish she had. I was encouraging her to do it at the time.
yeah, may not agree with her. People may not agree with her on every issue and her style and all of that, but you can always count on her to be there. She hasn't like dropped in and out of these issues.
Sort of like newsmakers. Okay.
Yes.
Couple of quick things before we go. Christina, I want to double back on IV, your piece on Deltopia. Sounds like they're basically outlawing Deltopia. What did they do?
Yeah, it's a little Footloose-esque. They're going to do a noise ban. They're basically extending the noise ban, which right now is for the night of Deltopia weekend, just 72 hours, with the hopes that it will essentially quash a lot of the big parties. The sheriff's office cited a lot of statistics about the cost and the toll on resources that Deltopia takes, as well as how many people from out of town go. A lot of students showed up. I think none of the students who spoke were in support of the ban of the ordinance.
Yes.
Their logic, which I think is fair, is that, Deltopia was created when they closed the beaches for Floatopia. And so what does this ordinance really do to get them not to just move the party to a different weekend on a different street? Doesn't even have to be on a different street, actually, for the ordinance. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. Um,
Yeah.
I'm gonna watch it for
Yeah.
sure.
I'm not sure that was such a great move. And then Josh, finally, Monique Limón, our state senator, and now the president pro tem of the state senate, third highest ranking elected official in the state of California, had a big. I mean, she was already inaugurated up in Sacramento a few days before, but she had she brought it to the district, had a nice event, and Marjorie Luke, as a former student over there, that was a pretty cool event.
Yeah, there's a lot of people there, a lot of her family, friends, elected officials, activists, and of course, former Vice President Kamala Harris showed up to, ceremonially swear her in, at this ceremony. And so the crowd erupted. That was kind of a, big deal. She didn't talk much. She just kind of said a few intro words and then swore Senator Limón in. It was a fun event. It was a cool event. It felt like, wow, here's this person who grew up in the community and she went to this school and she's just like every one of us and she's managed to get this far in the state legislature. So I think everybody just kind of felt proud of her and what she's accomplished. She gave a nice speech. She had her husband, her daughter was there. It was just a very good feel good moment. And then they had a reception afterward and people got to mingle. So it wasn't, the real stuff had happened earlier in the week, but this was really nice for her to give back to the district and kind of allow people to come in and, be part of it.
And I don't think
And
you
if
can
every school
understate.
Go ahead.
I don't think you could underestimate the effect of seeing her in this position of that has on, little kids growing up here.
Well, even more
It's crazy. It's
impressive to
big.
me than that event, though, Ryan, was the fact that she showed up a few days before that
Hmm.
for a big pro-immigrant rally, and she wasn't even like the star or oh
She
look
stood
at me or
outside of
something
the
like.
the ICE facility in Santa Maria with advocates and with the Gloria Soto from City Council of Santa Maria, and that's big too. There wasn't a lot of cameras there. There wasn't a big. She didn't do it for that. She did it because she does care, and I think she's really, it's. I think everybody in Santa Barbara is very proud of her. Anybody who grew up in the Latino community of Santa Barbara is really proud of her. And like I said, for kids growing up and to a little girl, a little boy to see her and be like, okay, I can do this. I can be in the Senate president position. That's huge. And that's what I think is lost still in today. I think we always take it for granted when we see, people of color in these big positions, the pressures they're under, the kind of big things they have to deal with, and how, big it is when we see them in these positions. So
Yeah.
congrats.
And as every school child knows, Monique Limón was the very first one-on-one guest on Newsmakers back 10 years ago,
They
11
show it in
years ago
schools
now.
today.
So yeah, so they, so she got not only, people come on, they get the Newsmakers bump for their campaign announcements, but she really got it for her entire career. So you're welcome, Monique, for what that's worth. All
And our
right,
friend
Josh,
Raul was there too, Jerry. And so, shout out to him, our
my
former
hero, my greatest
colleague.
hero of all time, her uncle, Raul Hill. Shout out, Raul. All right. Thank you all, Josh Molina, Christina McDermott, Ryan P. Cruz. Thank you all for watching. And we'll see you next time on Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.